CWD live testing here in Texas. This video, if you're a Texas deer farmer, you know everything I'm about to say, and you also know what you're about to look at. This video, I'm putting it out for the other states who raise deer, who want to know what goes on behind the scenes here in Texas when it comes to CWD live testing. I'm putting it out for all the Parks and Wildlife employees who have never seen this done, for the Texas Animal Health Commission employees who have never seen a live test done. And this is filmed on my farm here at San Jack Whitetails, here in East Texas, and for all the whitetail enthusiasts and people who just love deer, who follow us here on Deer Farming TV. One disclaimer here is that I'm gonna put the date here on the screen to let you know when this was filmed, just because this CWD testing is constantly changing and it's fluid. So what may happen a month from now, just who knows. But just the backstory of the testing and why we have to live test here in Texas is when you have a deer farm, for ones who just don't know, the enthusiast, the whitetail enthusiast, a deer farm, we're permitted through the state of Texas. And when we want to release a deer to what we refer to as a release site, the state of Texas requires that particular deer, or all deer, have a non-detect, or they are not CWD positive. And we do this through, number one, through a rectal biopsy. And this footage I'm filming, we're going to look at, is actual footage of a rectal biopsy be sent in to be live tested. So what is a release site? Well, here in Texas, we use several different words that really describe the same thing. Well, what a release site is, it's a ranch or landowner has their ground that's permitted to receive deer from a deer farm. Number one, this property that they have has to be high fenced. And also the property acres, it's all over the place. We refer to them as releasing to pasture. We refer to somebody who has a ranch that's buying deer from us, but it all means the same thing. In the north, the northern term a lot of times is used as a preserve. But just for an example, it's hard to even calculate an average acre of these release sites because they're all over the board. I thought about my last 3 customers who have bought deer from my pen setting to be put on their ranch. One of them, the smallest one, was a 500-acre block of land. I had one that was 13 acres, and I had a 2,700-acre customer who's releasing deer. So it's all over the place. You may have something as small as 50 to 100 acres that are a permitted release site, up to tens of thousands of acres that they're buying deer from a deer farm to improve genetics, buy stalkers, whatever. I mean, it's all over the place what they're using these better genetics for. So if you're releasing from point A deer farm to this release site in the state of Texas, they have to have a non-detect, they have to not have chronic wasting disease. Currently, our Texas deer farmers, as of this video, we have went through 2 main cycles of CWD live testing. The first one was the latter part of June in 2021 when these new rules came out. This video footage that you're going to look at, that the bucks that are going to be in velvet, my test was the middle of July of 2021. When these new rules came out, the biggest problem that we had here in Texas was the timing of actually the months that we had, just a short limited amount of time that we had to test these deer before they could be released. This footage that you're seeing here was middle of July, hot. It's the worst months that you have that you even want to work deer, because these bucks are pushing bone, they're growing antlers, and you don't want to bother them at all. And to work deer during this heat of the summer, something's going to go wrong. It just does. And at my farm here, I have a lot of timber, I have a lot of trees, so you have to dart the deer to put them to sleep. So I'm always darting out of an elevated ladder stand or a ground blind or something to that effect when we're actually working the deer. And the biggest concern with this is it's not the stress of having to dart a deer in your pen, it's the stress with having more people in the pen than normal. I can walk into my pen or drive my UTV in my pen and the deer are fine. If you just add an extra person, it's unbelievable how the deer know somebody else is in there. So you're darting. In my situation, I have my wife that's in there. She's working the deer for me to get them over to where I'm at to dart. And then you'll have a vet. You'll have at least 1, maybe 2 vet techs. And in this situation, we had a vet that's going through vet school who needed to come to help and observe. So we had way too many people in the pen, which is really normal when you're having to do this testing. It takes a lot of people to do, which stresses out the deer. It's not stressing out the deer that you're actually darting. You got to remember you're stressing out the deer that are in adjacent pens. During the summertime, you've got mamas that are in labor. You've got mamas that just had twins. You've got mamas that just had triplets. You've got so much stress that deer do not want stress in the summertime. It's totally different than the fall and the wintertime. Summertime is our stress period here in Texas for deer. Anything can go wrong. And people say, or the question that I had was a really good question, why don't you just run the bucks through your facility to do this testing? Well, number one, they just don't fit. All these bucks here that we're testing, they're 2-year-old stalker bucks. They will not fit in the chute. They just don't. And if they did, they're gonna break an antler, they're gonna break a main beam, they're gonna scrape that velvet off, which will lead to antler infection if not treated. There's something that will go wrong. You cannot run a antlered velvet buck through your facility to do this testing during this time of year. You're looking for disaster. So these deer have to be sedated. They have to be put asleep to do this rectal biopsy. So what is a rectal biopsy? Instead of me telling you what a rectal biopsy is, let's just look at it.
You can put my name on there.
Yeah, I do.
Blood trail coming out of their rectum, so it's kind of, but the year, I mean, the next time we come back, you can see the scar, it's healed up, and you can't tell.
Besides that stress that's put on these bucks, what's the overall cost of this? I've talked to several deer farmers who have figured the cost per deer. The best average that I got as of this video, it's costing $300 per deer to do this test, and that's a pretty solid average. Well, how would the average go up? The average goes up when you're darting a deer if you miss, because that drug, that sedation that's in that dart, it's very expensive. So you don't want to miss. If you go to missing, that's when that average goes up. You also got antibiotics that you have to give the deer, and anything else that you may have to treat the deer to look at while the deer's on the ground. I've heard averages as low as $250 per deer, and I've heard averages up to over $400. Here at my farm, my average was right at $300 per deer to do this test. One of the biggest concerns that we faced here in Texas with testing deer is not the stress of the deer that's being tested, it was the stress of the deer that were in adjacent pens. During my test, the first time that I had a 1-year-old buck that was in an adjacent pen, they hit the fence and he dislocated his jaw. The vet looked at him through binoculars and said, there's really nothing I can do. On this footage right here, was months ahead when the deer already turned 2, and the vet is looking at the deer that dislocated his jaw and seeing why his teeth are not lining up right and seeing if there's anything that he can do, and obviously there's not. This particular buck, his tongue hangs out all the time, and it's just one example of many of what just the unnecessary testing causes damage or stress to another deer. And I'll say this, and I do believe that every deer farmer in the state of Texas will agree to this statement. Just in the first week of testing for CWD, first week of live testing here in Texas, I guarantee you that we accidentally killed more deer testing for CWD than what CWD has ever killed, period, Texas or any state combined. That's how horrible just the stress level that it puts out on the deer in the adjacent pens. Not counting the fawns that got stepped on or trampled when mama got spooked. But you've got to remember, when you put 1 or 2 people in the pens, everything's fine. But when you add these 3 or 4 more people who are not used to working around deer, something will happen and death or injury will occur 100% of the time. You will not find a deer farm in Texas who has not had at least an injury testing for CWD, live testing. It's a horrible situation that we have to go to just to move our deer from point A to point B, and they're not finding anything. Check with Texas Deer Association, check with the Deer Breeders Co-op in Texas to get the real numbers. I'm not going to say the exact numbers now because it's fluid, and as soon as I tell you a number, what the number's been for testing, tomorrow it's going to be a higher amount. There's not CWD in testing. It's obviously a political disease. There's obviously way more going on. It's a money grab to speak of. I've talked to so many people who supply us stuff to test with, and they're loving it. More darts have to be sold. More antibiotics have to be sold, more sedation drugs have to be sold. The vets love it, it's more income. And what do? I mean, hopefully, good Lord willing, things will change and we will not have to put our deer through this extra stress, extra expense for nothing. I hope you enjoyed some of this footage. I hope you enjoyed seeing up close what a rectal biopsy really is. Any questions, please give me a call. God bless.